What you're looking at is not just a book. What if it was a forgotten thread in the tapestry of our history? Published over 120 years ago. Inside its pages, respected scholars made a stunning admission. The great pyramids and monumental earthworks of America belong to a people so advanced. Their accomplishments posed a mystery as profound as that of ancient Egypt. This was not some fringe theory published in a basement. It was an academic puzzle discussed in a journal called Records of the Past. But this history, this open questioning of our origins, was somehow forgotten or buried. Today, we dive into the text that dared to say it out loud. The text that reveals America's story is far older and far more mysterious than we were ever taught. The year is 1902. The world is on the cusp of radical change. The Wright brothers are a year from their first flight, and archaeologists are making world-shaking discoveries across the globe. It was an era defined by a thirst for knowledge, a time when the ruins of forgotten empires were being pulled from the dust. In this climate of discovery, a new academic journal was launched, Records of the Past. Its mission was to bring these incredible discoveries from the cradle of civilization in the old world to the perplexing remains in the new to a wider audience. The very first volume contains an introduction that is nothing short of explosive. It sets the stage for a world where the history of the Americas was not a settled question, but an open and deeply perplexing problem. The introduction speaks of the great temples, palaces, and pyramids found across the Western Hemisphere. It describes them as engineering marvels. But most critically, it states that these American monuments were created by a prehistoric man whose identity was a complete unknown. The authors were grappling with a profound enigma, while they could look to the old world and see a clear lineage. When they looked at the monumental works in their own backyard, they saw a void. They asked the questions we still ask today. Who were these builders? Where did they come from? The text speculated on land bridges, a theory reflecting the scientific thinking of the time. This was not a conspiracy theory. It was a candid admission of ignorance from the foremost minds of the day. They were staring at evidence of a highly advanced past in America and had no framework to explain it. They saw a history that seemed to predate the established timeline, and they weren't afraid to say so. This 1902 journal is our key. It's the official record of a time when mainstream thought was forced to confront the possibility that the Americas weren't a new world at all, but an old world in their own right, with a story just as ancient and just as mysterious as any across the ocean. The most powerful part of the 1902 introduction is its focus on the builders themselves. It describes a perplexing problem for archaeologists. In the early 1900s, a pervasive and deeply flawed narrative had taken hold, the myth of the Mound Builder. This theory proposed that the immense earthworks across North America were too sophisticated to have been built by the ancestors of the Native Americans. It was a convenient myth, one that served to disconnect indigenous peoples from their own heritage. The 1902 text, while not endorsing wild theories, reflects the deep confusion of the era. It speaks of a prehistoric man whose works rivaled those of the Nile, yet whose story was shrouded in silence. The scholars of the day were confronted with places like Cahokia, imagine standing in the American heartland, across the Mississippi River from modern-day St. Louis, Around the year 1100 AD, you would be in a city that, at its peak, was larger than London was at the time. This was Cahokia, a sprawling metropolis with a population that may have reached 40,000 people. Its heart was a massive central plaza.
Surrounded by over 120 earthen mounds. Dominating the landscape was Monk's Mound, a colossal four-terrace platform, rising 100 feet into the air. Its base, covering over 14 acres, is larger in area than the base of the Great Pyramid of Giza.
This was a meticulously planned urban center. Archaeologists have discovered Woodhenge's large timber circles that functioned as astronomical calendars. The people of Cahokia were master engineers, astronomers, and artists, part of a vast trade network. Yet, by 1350 AD, Cahokia was largely abandoned. Because the Cahokians had no known writing system. They left a void that 19th century theorists filled with lost race fantasies. But the 1902 scholars were also looking south to Moundville in Alabama. Situated on the Blackwater River, Moundville was a major Mississippian center that flourished between 1100 and 1458. The site consists of 29 massive platform mounds arranged around a vast plaza, using nothing more than woven baskets. The inhabitants transported millions of cubic feet of earth to construct these platforms for temples and the homes of the elite. Like Cahokia, it was a place of immense power. And like Cahokia, it was abandoned before European contact. Its history silenced. What modern archaeology has now proven, beyond any doubt, is that the lost race was a fiction. The builders of these incredible sites were the direct ancestors of modern Native American tribes. The silence that so perplexed the scholars of 1902 wasn't the silence of a vanished people. It was the silence imposed by a narrative that refused to see the genius dot of the cultures right in front of them. The profound mystery wasn't that a lost race had disappeared. It was that a continent-spanning civilization, built by indigenous hands, had been willfully ignored within the 1902 introduction to Records of the Past. Lies another urgent message. Beyond wondering who built America's ancient wonders, the authors were sounding an alarm about their imminent destruction. They painted a grim picture of a national heritage being lost to neglect and unskilled excavation. At the turn of the 20th century, America's ancient sites were under siege. The text laments the unskilled hands of treasure hunters, known as pot hunters, who were plundering mounds to sell relics on the antiquities market. Farmers were plowing through ancient earthworks. The authors saw this destruction and called for a national response, urging the government to enact federal laws to protect these sites. Their plea was part of a growing chorus of concern. Just 4 years later, in 1906, President Theodore Roosevelt signed the Antiquities Act into law. This landmark legislation gave the president authority to declare national monuments on federal land, creating the first general legal protection for cultural resources in the U.S. The act was a direct response to the looting of prehistoric ruins. Sites like Devil's Tower and Chaco Canyon were among the first to receive protection. However, before these protections were in place, thousands of mounds were destroyed. St. Louis, once nicknamed Mound City, saw all of its 26 mounds leveled for urban expansion. This brings us to a darker thread: the role of the Smithsonian institution. For many who delve into America's hidden history, the Smithsonian is not a hero of preservation, but a villain of suppression. The theory posits that the institution actively hid or destroyed evidence, particularly of giants or transoceanic contact, that contradicted the narrative of Native Americans as recent, primitive arrivals. While there is no concrete proof of a malicious cover-up on that scale, the atmosphere of the time was certainly one of narrative
Hört
control.
die Stimme des Vaterlandes. Wir werden siegreich sein. Unser Reich wird ewig bestehen.
A more charitable, and perhaps more realistic, view is that institutions like the Smithsonian were operating under the flawed scientific paradigms of the day, predisposed to dismiss the sophistication of indigenous cultures, but whether by design or bias, the result was the same. The history was buried. The fight for this history continues. The passage of the Native American Graves. Protection and Repatriation Act, NAGPRA, in 1990 was another critical step. This law requires institutions to return Native American cultural items, including human remains, to descendant communities. In a direct echo of the concerns from 1902, 7 tribes, including the Shawnee and Chickasaw nations, recently petitioned the University of Alabama to return more than 5,800 human remains excavated from Moundville. The empty display cases in the Moundville Museum today are a stark reminder of this ongoing struggle over who owns the past. Remade in 1902, as evolved, it is no longer just about saving ruins, but about returning a heritage to its rightful heirs. At the core of the 1902 text is the question of origins. Where did the builders of America's great monuments come from? The autors, working with the knowledge of their time, could only speculate, assuming a human origin. In the Old World, they considered a land bridge connecting Asia and North America, but also mentioned the more speculative ideas of sunken continents. Today, we know the Berinjalan Bridge was a primary migration route. However, the timeline they worked with was dramatically wrong. For much of the 20th century, the established dogma was the Clovis-First theory, holding that humans arrived around 13,500 years ago. This theory became so entrenched that evidence to the contrary was often ridiculed or dismissed. This academic gatekeeping created a narrative that conveniently portrayed the Americas as a new world, populated only recently. But in recent decades, that wall has crumbled. A flood of new discoveries has shattered the Clovis-First model. Sites like Monteverde in Chile and the White Sands footprints in New Mexico provide irrefutable evidence that humans were in the Americas 20,000, 23,000, or perhaps even 30,000 years ago. What this proves is that the American story is not a short one. It is a deep, ancient epic, the incredible cultures. The 1902 scholars puzzled over were not the result of some outside influence. They were homegrown, the mound-building cultures that began at places like Watson Break, Louisiana around 3500 BC, long before the pyramids of Egypt were built, were the result of local innovation. There was no need for Atlantean teachers. The genius was already here. The knowledge of astronomy, engineering, and agriculture was developed over millennia by the people of this land. America doesn't need a connection to the old world to validate its history, because it is an old world. It is a hemisphere of ancient peoples, forgotten cities, and a timeline of human ingenuity that we are only just beginning to truly appreciate. The scholars of 1902 were asking the right questions. They saw the evidence and recognized that it didn't fit the story they'd been told. That spirit of questioning is what drives us today. If you believe there's more to our history than what's in the textbooks, hit the like button and subscribe. For more deep dives into the forgotten chapters of our past, what's the most compelling piece of evidence for you? Let me know in the comments below. So, what have we learned from this journey back to 1902? The journal records of the past is not proof that America was literally the cradle of all humanity. But it is definitive proof of something just as powerful. That over a century ago, the official story was not set in stone. Mainstream academics were openly admitting that the scale of America's ancient civilizations presented a perplexing problem. That challenged the established timeline. They looked at the monuments of the Mississippi Valley and saw a mystery that rivaled the wonders of Egypt. The tragedy is what happened next. Instead of following the evidence, the narrative hardened. The Mound Builder myth was replaced by the rigid dogma of the Clovis-First theory. The real revelation is not that some lost race built Cahokia, but that they didn't have to. The genius was homegrown. The builders were Native American innovators who shaped the very earth. America is an old world. What else have we not been told?
Hit subscribe for more deep dives into the forgotten realities of history, tech, and luxury.